Hello and welcome back to this AWS course. In fact, welcome to the start of section 4. So just a quick recap. In section 2, we deployed our website to AWS CloudFront. And then in section 3, we built a small API server and deployed it to AWS as a Lambda. So in this first lesson, what we're going to do is connect that UI to the API server using HTTP fetch. If you'd like to follow along, all you need to do is visit richardbraycourses.co.uk and find this link to the repo, and you'll find it takes you straight to GitHub. And you'll see there's a folder for every lesson in the section. So this folder here is for lesson 1, and this code is what we'll end up with at the end of this lesson. If you'd like to pick up where we left off, just go to section 3's repo, and you'll see there's a folder for each lesson here, and the end of section 3 was here, so just go and get hold of this code. Right, with that, let's go to Visual Studio Code, and this is how we left things in our mono repo at the end of section 3. And the first thing I'd like to do is to get the front end and the API server both up and running locally in dev mode. So let's bring up a couple of terminals for that. And we'll start with the API server. So if we look at the source code, if you remember, we need to run this local.ts. And in order to do that, let's just see, we've got this script that runs tsx. It's still left at app.ts. So let's just change this to local.ts. So this is going to run this local TypeScript file against tsx. And if you remember, the local TypeScript file loads our Express app and then listens on port 3001. Okay, so in order to run that from the root, I just want to run this dev command from the root package.json. So I will add a line and say API dev is going to change directory to the folder containing this package.json, which is services API. Let's change this to services/API and run dev. So this dev is this dev over here. And as I've said, that's going to run local.ts. So let's get that up and running. I'll just use my alias prun for this, which will run p and pm -- silent run. So prun API dev. And there we have it. So the API server is now up and running on port 3001. So the next thing I'd like to do is get the UI up and running. And again, we can see there's a UI dev for that. So I'll just run that, prun UI dev. And we can bring this up in the browser. So there's the local browser. We can see it's all up and running locally. Okay, now to connect the two, I'm going to make a code change in the UI and add some code that will connect it to the API server. So to do that, I'm going to create a folder called services. And the idea is going to be that we're going to have one file for each server that we're going to connect to. So I'll create a new file called API server.ts. And the code to connect to the API server is going to go in here. So I'm just going to paste some in here. And we can see it's a single function called check API server health, because at the moment we've only got one endpoint on the API and it's /health. So the way this works is we first of all make a fetch call. Fetch is a built-in JavaScript function, and it does the equivalent of curl. So remember, in the last lesson we went curl localhost :3001/health, and we got this string healthy back. Well, this is doing the same as that curl essentially. So it goes off, calls this endpoint and gets a response. Now, the first thing we do is check response OK. Is basically saying, yep, the connectivity all works correctly and we got a response. If it's not OK, we return false. Otherwise, we continue and we analyze the response we got. So we await response text. It's reading the body of the data we got back into this string. And then we check that the string contains healthy, just like down here. and we return true or false according to whether it does or not. So now I'd like to actually call this function, and to do that I'm going to create a footer that is going to report the status of the API server. So we've already got a header component over here, so I'm just going to copy in a footer. There we go. And this is relatively simple. As you can see, it imports check API server health from the services API server, and it calls it down here. It returns a promise to healthy, and then sets this React state API server is healthy according to whether we get true or false back. Incidentally, the API server is healthy is initialized to null, so it's null until we set this true or false. And so down here we interpret the value of API server is healthy, null, true or false, and we either have services checking, services okay, or services API server down, which is reported in this div down here. So all we need to do now is to add this footer into our application. So essentially I'll just add it down here, say footer like this, and import it. And that is just about all we need to do. We're going to see that there's a small technical problem we need to get over, but let's go and return back to our website. You'll notice that this has actually been hot module reloading. It's reloaded app.tsx as we've changed it. So let's just follow this link. And in fact, I'm going to pick this up and look at this in Chrome. So let me just, so we need to do a bit of investigation. So here we are. And we can see it's saying services API server down, which at first is a little disappointing, but let's go and have a look what's going on. So I'll move the console down to the bottom. So we can see in the console this message, access to fetch act, and this is the API server address from origin, and this is the UI server address, and the Vite address has been blocked by CORS policy. No access control allow origin header is present. So let's go to the network tab, and I'll just refresh this page and then look at this health message, which is clearly where the error is. If we drill down into here, we can see that we are getting a 200 OK message back from the API server. However, what's going on here is the browser has refused to give this response to the React application because the response that we got back didn't contain the required CORS header. So we can see the headers in the response here, but there's nothing to do with CORS. So we have to update our API server to essentially add a header back into the response. So let's go and do that. Tuck this away for now. And this is a pretty easy change, you'll be pleased to hear. We'll just go to app.ts over here. This is our API server code, and we just need to add this into the header, access control allow origin star. So when we add this into the response header, everything should work just fine. So with that, we'll restart our API server, and then we'll go back to Chrome and we'll reload this page. You see down here, API server down. When I reload, it says services okay. And in fact, we can now go back and have a look at the network tab again, reload this, and the health call, we can see that access control allow origin star has been added as one of the response headers, and that's fixed the problem. So all good. I'll bring this lesson to a close here, and I'll see you in the next.